They also, once again, to have appreciation of this great data resource we all have access to at our institutions. Just shows what we can do if we as libraries can also open this in such a way for machine learning purposes for our researchers. We're now going to go across to our discussion, and I would like Professor van der Kerk to come to the stage. And we have you on the screen, Professor Cruz, and we'll be taking some questions from the audience, the virtual audience, those who are participating virtually and those who are participating in person. So I'm going to start by asking whether there are any questions from our in-person audience in the venue. Wow, we have a lot of questions. So we have Kate Robinson first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. I have a question for Professor van der Kerk, if I may, which is I wonder if you think there might be a danger in our artificially humanizing robots through our sympathy and our empathy, and therefore as...
I have difficulty in hearing you.
Could I remove this for a moment? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I wondered if you might think that there could be a danger in our artificially humanizing robots through our sympathy and our empathy, thinking about their actions, and therefore maybe as excusing or allowing harmful behaviors to continue rather than simply reprogramming them.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that is a very interesting scenario. I mean, you know, the in-principle question here is the issue, do we want to humanize robots? Is that what they are for? I mean, are we producing them primarily for the sake of performing whatever task is set for, and do we in the process as well want to go beyond that and actually humanize? At this stage, my thinking goes more towards the idea of preventing harm, you know, talking ethics. And one of the fundamental principles of both biomedical and ethics in general is primum non nocere. That first of all, do no harm. Minimize the harm that could be caused. And if it then turns out, you know, that there are needs left that requires some form of humanizing, that, you know, then one can have a look at that. The question, of course, is what that might entail, you know, to humanize. I mean, do we want a robot that asks our forgiveness if it's made a mistake, you know, or that acknowledges its mistakes? Maybe to acknowledge its mistakes is okay. To ask for a pardon, that seems a little bit on the silly side to me. I don't know whether I'm addressing your question, but I mean, it depends on this very specific context in which you are working.
I suppose what I was thinking was when you were talking about ourselves and our own characteristics with regard to sympathy and empathy, I was wondering if we were in danger of artificially applying those to robots ourselves, so that we're not humanizing them, but our own perceptions of them may be humanizing them, if you see what I mean. And therefore we're not correcting mistakes.
That in turn it raises the question of what do we mean by humanizing. If we mean by humanizing simply projecting what we are in any case doing ourselves, then I agree with you, then you know, humanizing is not necessarily such a wonderful thing. They tell the story of the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, that every time that he got, there are many stories about Schopenhauer and his dog, but one of the incidents was that the dog did something wrong, and Schopenhauer's reaction was, "You human being," I mean, as a way of insulting him, you know, of in fact insulting him. But I mean, humanizing, I mean, so there are two senses here of humanize. Humanize could mean simply to project ourselves, bones and all, and then there is little potential for real improvement. But then humanize can also have a normative meaning. a normative meaning, that is to make the world really a better place, and to let the good sides of the better angels of our nature, to quote Lincoln, to let the better angels of our nature get a hold on the world. And I suppose one must make out which of these two you have in mind there.
Yes, Isaac van der Walt. Yeah, thank you.
My question is for Prof. Anike. Fantastic presentation as well, Prof. How do we get rid of the biases that is built into the data? Because a lot of people get the data that they want to use for artificial intelligence, but they might not inherently know about the biases that exist within this data, and some of these data can influence to a large extent the outcomes of people's financial situation, and that individual working with it does not even know that the biases exist. So how do we get the guidance in terms of that?
Well, I don't want to dodge your question, but let me immediately say, the moment you ask how do we do that, you assume that you are talking to some researcher in the field of artificial intelligence that can give you guidance on this. And I'm afraid I'm not that person. I do not have the technological knowledge and prowess and sense of the possibilities available. I mean, may I throw the question back at you? Are there possibilities of, or do you foresee at the moment, in terms of things going at the moment, possibilities of programming machines in such a way that biases will not play any role? I'm not very, if I may drop in somewhere, I'd like to hear your question. I'm not very optimistic about that, because in my simplified idea of the nature of knowledge, as is strongly informed by hermeneutic philosophy, prejudgment, bias, these things of necessity play a role, particularly in the world of the social sciences with which I am most familiar. Of necessity play a role in our establishment of knowledge. I can or put it that way, it is difficult for me to foresee how that can be avoided. But then the caveat there is, I am just too stupid. I just don't know. And I'd like to hear your response.
This is okay. Perfect. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that the data as we receive it without any intention behind using the data.
Are you sure of that?
Well, I might not be sure of it because
that, that's
yeah.
a strong statement.
So if I use an example, if you look at the historical financial data of people applying for loans, you will see in the data that historically, as an example, a black man would not be approved for a loan due to certain information. Right. But someone who receives the data without that context or without that known that the bias existed might use it, and the end result might still be negative towards a black individual in that sense. But yeah, I think it's probably open for debate because people don't know some of the biases that exist. That's just one example of types of biases. There's biases towards gender and so forth when it comes to the data. But not everybody can be aware, even if they have a bias. Well, I don't know. Prof would be better in terms of answering that. But people look at the data, they think the data is valid, and they use the data without even taking into account the biases. No.
I think my colleague wants to say something.
Yes, no, certainly. Professor Cruz, your comments? If you have any comments on the question?
Oh.
Not yet.
No comments on this question.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood a hand gesture of yours.
All right. Okay. There is a third question from Samuel, and then we can go to Ellen thereafter, because we don't have any questions from the virtual audience yet. I do have one, but after you.
Hello, my question is for Prof. Van Kirk. My name is Samuel from Stellenbosch University. This question is probably linked to what was asked early on by Catherine. I'm Katie Robinson. And it applies to the application of morality and ethics to autonomous AI systems. So recently in South Africa, the first patent was awarded to an AI system for the creation of a work. And this opens the door for the assignment of legal personality to AI systems and blameworthiness to the systems rather than the humans who actually created them. So my question now is rather your opinion, because this might be a tricky question. From an ethics perspective, what is your opinion about the assignment of blameworthiness to AI systems rather than their original human creators? Because the door has been opened now by South Africa.
Yeah. No, thanks. I mean, it is a question analogous, you know, to the classic example of the vehicle that goes awry and that, you know, hits somebody, and now a decision has to be made as to who has to carry blame, and you know, then the question is, as you say, does the instrument carry legal personhood or the manufacturer? In terms of what I've argued today, I have difficulty in making, you know, sense of the idea of awarding, what do you call it, legal personhood, legal, whatever the term was that you used, rechtspersoonlijkheid, yeah. Legal personality, to you know, a non-human entity, I mean, I have real difficulty in figuring that out, for the simple reason, you know, that I am under the impression of the significant differences between machines, robots, and human beings. But again, you know, my information may simply be limited. And if there are people with other views on this, it would be wonderful to hear them and to hear their arguments as well.
Thank you. Ellen?
Well, I'm not going to respond to that,
Yeah, okay.
but maybe, and I'm going to put him on the spot now. Professor Bruce Watson is here, and he is the chair in artificial intelligence in the School for Data Science. But I actually want to speak with Professor Cruz. Well, you know, when you said we can do this after this session, our own bibliometric study on AI, and then you showed us a screen with 118 search terms. Maybe there are some librarians here who have developed that search term for some of the work. I haven't been doing that for a long time myself. But I would be interested to know that, or even what you would suggest, because this issue around biases, ethics, algorithm, we have recently seen in terms of the situation with Facebook again, the whistleblower, the harm that it is causing to children, and so on and so on. So I think the information profession, library information profession, as much as we stand for promoting and ensuring access to information, freedom of expression, and all of those aspects, we feel within this fourth industrial revolution, within this whole artificial intelligence, that we seem to have to take on a new role, as we had tried through copyright and all those other things in the past in terms of the print world, that in terms of also, in a sense, have a responsibility in protecting and assisting users to be able to distinguish between, you know, what is fake news and all of those things. So it's a huge issue, and definitely something that libraries all over the world are taking up. And in terms of how can we also educate, you know, our users in terms of this. So I'm very interested to know, linking it with Professor van Niekerk's presentation, if you have been able to pick up anything that's focusing specific on the issue around ethics and AI and these other aspects, negative aspects of artificial intelligence, and the way it may impact and influence our lives that I think could be worse than a pandemic like COVID-19, if we're not careful.
Absolutely. It's, I'm sure that in the enormous list of articles that I have obtained, there is a sizable part of it that deals with those topics, starting with the potato one. The thing is that it seems to me that today, in terms of using algorithms, one of the main challenges, as you mentioned, is a need for transparency in the algorithms. And this transparency is not simple, right? Because, I mean, it's not only a matter of showing the algorithm or the code lines, but it's a matter of demonstrating or estimating the impacts of that algorithm. But making them visible would already be helpful, because other persons could test it and could look for the biases that might be hidden or might not have been perceived or noted by the persons who developed the algorithms. Because it's good to have in mind that not always the bias is built there by intention. In many, many cases, the bias is built there by accident, because, I mean, they didn't test it enough, or they didn't pay attention enough to that. And this thing about transparency is the reason why I wanted to show you this separate search using those 118 terms, because that is transparent. The terms are there on the slide and you can search with them. There's no algorithm going there, except for an algorithm that ran in my mind while I was building the list, which might have created some bias there. I cannot say absolutely no to that. But it is a process of trial and error, the same way as we do in the library, right? A librarian does that when they are preparing a bibliographic list. And to conclude this, I wanted to bring out the fact that electronic or digital access of information and of bibliographic information brought a lot of new work and new responsibilities to librarians, to the librarian's profession. I saw that in my university, how the library changed or is changing because of the fact that with electronic access, on one hand, professors and students tend to try to do that by themselves, but at the same time, they are not experts in doing that. So they make many times mistakes that a librarian would not, which makes the library a more relevant place for the university and for the advancement of knowledge than many people think it is.
Thank you. There's applause for that answer, Professor Cruz. I'm going to have another question from the floor, and before we look at the virtual questions, Professor Watson.
Thanks very much. Excuse me. Also, thanks for passing that to me. It's appreciated. So I'm Bruce Watson. I'm actually an algorithmic specialist. I've been an algorithmicist for about 3.5 decades. And I was actually an algorithmicist long before it became a dirty word. So, you know, I think very few people would admit that on their CV or on LinkedIn nowadays. I actually just wanted to make a comment because I thoroughly enjoyed both talks. I happen to be, you know, both a nerd and an optimist. So I sort of, I look at the deep technical issues, and we actually work on some of the things that, in your case, Professor van Niekerk, were mentioned explicitly in your slides. And I think it's worth noting that there are exciting developments that are actually ongoing. We know, for example, how to introduce hesitance into the behavior of algorithms. Mm-hmm. We also know how to introduce competitive behavior between algorithms in a single system, so you don't just...
Sorry, may I just ask, is
yes.
that hesitance in the sense of thinking again?
Indeed, indeed,
right.
Indeed. So, you know, being able to pause until the last possible moment before some action needs to be taken. We also know how to design algorithms that have probabilistic behavior, so they're not deterministic. Now, for, you know, those of us that sit with our laptop, the worst thing you can imagine is something that's not deterministic. You know, you really wanted to do something in Word that you wanted to do, and if it decides to do something else, that's not normal behavior. But you know, in other contexts, that kind of thing is perhaps what's desired. And then the last thing that I would like to add in is the other thing is the reality is that 99% of algorithms that exist nowadays and are in use are algorithms that are designed in a very traditional sense, completely without bias, not built from data, but those are the least impactful algorithms. So that other 1% are the ones that are in the hands of the Facebooks and the Cambridge Analytica and so on. And in a sense, you know, this is now, we've given nuclear weapons to kids, is what it boils down to. So stuffing that genie back in the bottle is impossible. What you need to do is, you know, hand out bulletproof vests or something like that, because you're not taking back the weapons. So, you know, these new techniques for designing algorithms, you know, I have hope of mitigating some of these issues. So, you know, I apologize that it's more commentary, but very exciting talks that you both gave. Thanks very much.
Well, that's very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've got 2 questions from our virtual participants. I'm going to go for the second one first. I'm going to read it out as it says, although it needs a bit of interpretation. Don't you think we are shooting ourselves in the foot by collecting data and storing it as it is compared to the norm of collecting information sources and knowledge? And I think the thinking here is using data for decision making, whereas information did go through a certain form of processing already. Since the background information tells one whether to trust that data or not, I think it's perhaps if we could try answering this. I think it obviously has got a lot to do with scale, and that the data shows trends, and in that is the intelligence in the data, whereas with information we've already processed those trends for us. Perhaps Professor Cruz, would you attempt an answer at this?
Yeah, I can attempt to comment on the question because I'm not sure I have a direct answer to it. I think that the question points out to an extremely relevant topic, which is we should never be blinded by data to believe that data is insight. data might become insight and understanding if we process it correctly, either automatically or in our minds. So the question brings to my mind, I like books. And the question brings to my mind what was written in the first page of a book where I learned about numerical calculus. And the author wrote there, the purpose of calculation is insight, not numbers. So the purpose of data is to give us insight, and it's up to us to turn data into insight and not just follow blindly without context, without thinking twice about what the data might mean.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Professor van Niekerk, any comments on that, or shall we try the first question?
Yeah, I think let's try the first question. I'm not entirely sure, as to what is being asked.
Yes, no, it is it's rather ambiguous. So the question we have is, and well, we've sort of addressed that to a certain extent, but we'll ask it: which institution is best placed to uphold the ethical responsibility to do no harm? Because there's no existing track record when looking at what is currently going on in government, in business, in political and religious environments, or in civil society. So the question is there any hope for ethical AI?
Yeah, well, you see, I think what one must be very careful about is the idea that when we are dealing with ethics, we are dealing with a code that is specifically written either for this activity or for that province of life or whatever, and can simply be applied. So that, Ellen, you could have your students trained into library ethics, and now you have a set of 10 or 20 points, that are adequate for all the uncertainties that could arise, that you teach them well, let them write an essay about it, and then you are. I mean, of course, it is very important to teach ethics. I mean, it's that has been an issue very much in the past, whether we can have that expectation of ethics at all, that it will, that it can be taught. There's the famous saying that says, ethics is not taught, it is caught. And by that is meant, the extent to which you are ethical is very more dependent on the way you grew up, the influence of your parents, your teachers, your professors, your whatever. I, on the other hand, would much rather make a plea for a notion of ethics that sees it as an interactive, consistent, continuing learning process. Of course, there is a significant literature to be mastered that comes already from the Greeks, from Aristotle in particular, and many others. And the broad outlines one should have. But the damnedest thing about ethics to get used to is that you are wasting your time if you are looking at definitive final answers, that will always be, can always be available. It is a dialectical process, a process of to and fro, of setting up one thesis and countering it with another antithesis, and looking for a synthesis, the old Hegelian structure of thinking. That, unfortunately, is inevitable. That's what I meant when I said in my presentation that in thinking about ethics, we must accommodate the notion of both fallibility and phronesis. Fallibility in the sense of realizing. When I'm arguing ethically, I must always be able to produce my arguments, 4 o'clock in the morning, if necessary. produce. These were my concerns. But it is always possible that I might have made a mistake and that I must be able to live with that mistake. Froness is the same. The idea of acknowledging fundamental norms that like never do harm or try to avoid harm, but applying those norms to specific situations which will give an outcome that is not always self-evident in the original sense.
What I like about that is as libraries, as we start looking at responsible operations with artificial intelligence, it shows there's no silver bullet. It's a continuous process of being ethical and revising your thinking and your decision making. And so there's no recipe. Thank you very much for that. I'm happy to take another question from the audience. If not, I do have one of my own, which I'm really, there we go. Siviwe.
Thank you so much. My name is Siviwe Bangani. I'm based at the Stellenbosch University. This is for Prof. Brito. I was also in the same predicament as you. With Prof, I was listening to a lecture, a very interesting lecture, I must say. And there are a number of things that I learned today. But I will just direct my question to Prof. Brito. You did, allude to the fact that bibliometrics can also help us with impact and all. I know that you didn't, necessarily look at that in your study. But in terms of observing, just looking at the patterns, without necessarily, really studying them, deeply, do you foresee that the patterns that you see with the outputs, in terms of, China and everything else, everybody else, do you foresee that they would, be similar in terms of the patterns of impact?
Well, thank you for the question. There is a whole new world open in terms of analyzing patterns with respect to knowledge creation. And the one thing that I find extremely interesting about patents in terms of impact is the fact that we can now, because we have the data, in this effort of turning data into insights, we can now look at which scientific articles were cited by the patents. And I've seen this very recent study from last year that demonstrated, by analyzing the data of articles cited by patents in several fields, the importance of basic research to the development of technology, which I find to be a very interesting fact, not because no one supposed that. I always supposed it, but it was more like a belief, not the result of an analysis. But now we can see that basic research results published in articles drive a lot of the patents that happen, which might bring back the question of how much are the authors of the basic research articles responsible for the patents that might create bad or wrong things using the knowledge they created, which is a question that always haunted the scientific community and scientists everywhere in terms of the impact or the results of their science. Most of us tend to cling to the belief that good science will result in good things, but sometimes good science might result in not so good things. So that's a whole new world which is open since we now can look at this kind of data about patents and articles.
Do you have a follow-up question or not? Is that good? All right, thank you. I'm going to allow for one more question. And if it's not from the audience, I might just... there we go. Thank you.
I did not want to ask a question because of the fact that most of my colleagues were... I mean, you answered most of the question very well. I was in... This is for Professor Van Niekerk. I was at a conference recently in Europe, in US, and there was this talk about whether robots are more ethical than humans. And they were talking about it in relation to warfare, and they're discussing issues that happened in Iran, Iraq. There was a very big killing that was done there by the US soldiers. And the argument was that if that was a robot following the rules of war, that wouldn't have happened because they're programmed to do A, B, C, D, and that wouldn't happen. But humans, it happened because humans realized that this is my friend, my colleague, we have been in the war for him for all these years, and this thing has happened, and they started shooting people, doing things that are not allowed by the rules of the war. So the issue was that robots probably would be more, I think it also applies the use of drones for the warfare environments. And there was argument that perhaps robots would, in that case, under those circumstances, be more useful in those environments than humans, because humans would be carried away by their own other humanistic things. Yeah. And in the same argument, when we come to prescriptive ethics, for instance, prescriptive ethics is also, I'm glad that my colleagues from algorithms are here, and my colleagues from artificial intelligence are here, and a philosopher is here. Because in that audience, there were more people from military and philosophers and ethicists. And I see a lot of connection between those areas, those broad areas. And another argument was that in prescriptive ethics, robots would perform better. And humans are so much...
in prescriptive ethics, what?
Robots will perform better because it goes by rules than other types of ethics. I would not like you to throw it back to me, as you always do, but that's very nice. But would you want to answer?
Yeah, you're so well on your way. I would very much like to hear your own take on it. Yeah. This is the amazing thing, is that, as was also suggested earlier, robots do exactly what you tell them to do. And in that sense, I've often heard the argument that says, it would be a better idea to send robots into battle than human beings, because, or to put it the other way around, we need not fear the scenario of robots taking over the world, because they do what they're told. And as long as we keep telling them what they are supposed to do correctly and without ambiguity, then we are in safe hands. So I've found that a compelling argument. It is, I think, an attractive idea to send, if one has to make war, let's rather strive for a world in which there is no war. But if war has, in the end, to take place, then rather to rely on artificial intelligence rather than people, because people. Yes, you get these admirable situations that you are referring to, where you care for your body and you do all kinds of unprecedented kind of things. But as much opportunities there is for those admirable actions, as much opportunity is there for stupidity in a war situation. And I think that is something that can probably be maybe a little bit better controlled in the warfare of artificial intelligence. But again, you know, let me not be too expressful about this, because I really don't know.
Okay. Thank you so much, and our time is up, so all that remains is to applaud our two speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Cruz, for joining us virtually and sharing your research with us and your insight. It's very much appreciated, and have a very nice day further.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, Professor Van Niekerk, for joining us here today. Okay, thank you. We'll adjourn for lunch now. We'll need to be back at 1:30. Lunch will be served outside in the courtyard as you go down the stairs. Be back at 1:30. Lunch will be served outside in the courtyard as you go down the stairs. At 1:30. Lunch will be served outside in the courtyard as you go down the stairs. At 1:30. Lunch will be served outside in the courtyard as you go down the stairs. At 1:30. Lunch will be served outside in the courtyard.
Thank you.